Kyle Duvall hadn't cried in 20 years. Not when his father died, not when the board tried to oust him, not even when he built an empire from the bones of rejection and ruthless ambition. But tonight, in the silence of his penthouse, bourbon trembling in hand, his eyes burned hot. The television played quietly in the background. It was late. He hadn't been paying attention, just white noise to distract him from another sleepless night. Then came a voice, soft, familiar, a laugh that struck like a memory he didn't know he still carried. He looked up. There she was, Alara. Her smile still made the room feel smaller, brighter. She held a baby, their baby. Kyle froze, his throat closed. The glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. His chest caved inward as he reached toward the screen like it could bring her closer. She was alive, well, glowing, and he had destroyed everything. Have you ever lost something you thought you'd never get back, only to realize you were the one who pushed it away? Not by accident, but by choice, by trusting the wrong person, by doubting the one who gave you nothing but love. This is a story about mistakes that cut deeper than betrayal. A story of a man who believed a lie, and a woman who paid the price. But what if one unexpected moment, just a flicker of truth, offered him one last chance to make it right? Would he take it, or was he already too late? Welcome to Mr. Ross Story Trail, where every story walks you down a path of love, loss, and life lessons. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to like and share this story if it moves you even a little. Every story matters, especially the ones that teach us how to love better. Kyle didn't move for several minutes. The screen faded into another segment, but the image of her remained etched into him like glass beneath the skin. She looked stronger, not bitter, not broken. There was a quiet power in her posture, in the way she held the child, one arm wrapped around his tiny back, the other guiding a potted plant into the camera's frame. The reporter's voice mentioned something about sustainable living, eco-conscious parenting, small business, single motherhood. Kyle wasn't listening. The baby had his eyes, that unmistakable shade of gray. He should have known. He did know. But he hadn't trusted himself. He had trusted her, his mother, the woman who raised him, shaped him, warned him. She had planted doubt with precision, and he had let it grow roots in the one place Alara had made sacred, his heart, his fury, the silence afterward. She never yelled. She just wept, clutching her stomach as if protecting the child from his words. She had begged him to believe her. He had told her to leave. She did, without another word. And now, months later, she stood on national television, smiling. He didn't deserve that smile. He didn't deserve her strength. And yet something inside him stirred. Not hope, not yet, but regret. The kind that doesn't visit in polite whispers. The kind that hits in the middle of the night, through a glowing screen and the sound of a familiar laugh. Kyle turned off the television. The room, once dimly lit by soft color and movement, now felt heavier without it, as if silence itself had become a witness to his shame. He pressed his palms to his face, dragging them down slowly like he could wipe away the man he'd been these past months. Work had kept him moving. Meetings, deals, growth projections. All the things that once defined him now served as distractions, soulless distractions. None of it had mattered. Not since Alara. He told himself she was manipulative, that she'd used him, that she wanted his money, his name, his legacy, that the child couldn't be his, that no one falls for someone like him without a reason. But every excuse now felt like a lie he had told to quiet the voice in his head, the one that whispered her name when the world went still. She had loved him, simply, without agenda, and he had turned on her the moment it mattered most. A man can rise to the top of the world and still lose everything worth having. Kyle walked to the window, looking out over the city. It sparkled beneath him, a world he'd conquered, yet never truly belonged to. Out there somewhere she was building something, a life, a future, without him. But not without his child. He didn't know where to start. He only knew he had to. Kyle stood there for a long time, watching the city blink beneath the dark. Every light was someone's story, someone's family, a window into a life with meaning. He'd spent years building towers out of steel, stock, and strategy, but nothing he ever built compared to what he saw in that brief TV segment. Alara had built something real, Without him, he thought about the child again. The way his head rested against her shoulder, the small fingers curled around her necklace, the subtle resemblance in the boy's brow, familiar, undeniable. That child was his, and he'd missed everything. First words, first laugh, first steps maybe. He pressed a hand flat against the glass, the city beneath a blur. He had no right to ask for forgiveness, but he had every reason to try, because if there was even the slightest chance that Alara still carried a place for him in her heart, if the door wasn't entirely closed, he would find it, not to fix the past, not to rewrite it, but to take responsibility, to look her in the eyes and say the one thing that had never come easy to him: I was wrong. He stepped back from the window. His reflection stared back at him. Not the CEO, not the public figure, not the name behind the empire. Just a man. One who lost the only truth he'd ever known. But maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Cale Duvall was a man who owned the skyline. From the top floor of the Duvall Holdings headquarters, he could see everything. A cold, endless grid of commerce, control, and consequence. Chicago bowed beneath him, a city he'd conquered without ever once asking permission. The office behind him stretched like a private museum. Everything was curated, imported mahogany furniture, abstract sculptures no one could explain, the low hum of recessed lights, and a silence so absolute it could choke a thought before it was spoken. His assistant had just left. Something about a media acquisition deal on the table. He didn't answer. He hadn't heard half of what she said. His eyes were on the glass. It was always the glass. Something about watching people move below, cars weaving through intersections, strangers crossing streets with coffee in hand. It reminded him of how far he'd removed himself. Everyone said he had it all. The youngest self-made billionaire in his industry. Featured in magazines, headlined in finance panels, admired by men who wanted his success and women who wanted a piece of it. But they didn't know the quiet. They didn't know how heavy silence felt when the last voice that mattered was gone. Kyle adjusted his cufflinks, more out of habit than necessity. Everything he wore was custom, down to the socks. Power had a uniform, and he wore it well. Still, none of it warmed him. Not the success, not the applause, not the empty congratulations that echoed louder than truth. He used to feel something, back when building his company meant long nights and raw hunger. Now it was just movement without meaning. He was efficient, polished, controlled, but he hadn't felt alive in months, not since her. The first time he saw Alara Winslow, she was crouched beside her car, hands smudged with dirt, attempting to repot a small plant that had fallen from her passenger seat. It was a Sunday. He remembered because he hated Sundays. They made everything slow down. She hadn't seen him watching. She wasn't dressed up, no makeup, worn jeans, a cotton tee with a faded design. Her hair was pulled up messily, a streak of soil on her cheek she hadn't noticed. But there was something about the way she worked, gentle, patient, that made him pause. No rush, no performance, just care, as if the small green thing in her hands deserved her full attention. He didn't know her name, not yet, but something about her presence, calm, sure, quietly vibrant, stayed with him long after she drove away. That same week he found himself parking in the same area again. No meetings, no errands, just hoping. And on Thursday she was there. But that's later. Right now, she didn't exist in his world. Not yet. Right now, Kyle's phone buzzed on his desk, displaying a message from his mother. Dinner tomorrow. We need to discuss the donor event. He didn't reply. His mother never asked. She scheduled. Serafina Duvall had built her life like a chessboard. Every person a piece, every move part of a greater outcome. She didn't approve of weakness. She didn't entertain unpredictability. And she certainly didn't believe in emotions when it came to decisions. Kyle had once admired that. Now he wasn't so sure. He left the office without a word, descending 50 floors in a quiet elevator. As the doors opened into the waiting car, the driver nodded, and Kyle gave a rare wave of dismissal. He wanted to walk. Even if the wind bit at his jaw, even if no one would dare believe the great Kyle Duvall was choosing pavement over prestige, he needed the ground beneath his feet. He moved through the streets with his collar turned up, a man among millions and yet entirely apart. Just 2 miles away, in Green Park, a small neighborhood Kyle had once referred to as quaint, dismissively, Alara Winslow leaned over a wooden table splattered with paint, pencil shavings, and clippings of leaves. Her studio wasn't much. It was attached to the back of an old brick house she rented month to month. The floor creaked when she shifted her weight. The window beside her desk stuck in the cold. Her lamp flickered if she didn't twist the plug just right. But it was hers, and it was enough. She dipped her brush into a deep green and added texture to a fern's leaf. It was part of a series she'd been working on, botanical illustrations for a local eco-market. They didn't pay much, but she didn't need much. Her phone buzzed beside her. A message from her friend Annie. Don't forget the farmer's market booth deadline. And eat, you plant-obsessed hermit. Alara smiled softly. She used to rush through things. But not anymore. Not since her mother passed. Not since life taught her that quiet wasn't something to escape. It was something to hold. She paused, stretching her back, breathing in the scent of sage and soil. A breeze passed through the open window, fluttering the edge of her sketch. She caught it gently, held it down with a glass jar. There was peace here. Not fame, not wealth, but peace. And for Alara Winslow, that was more than enough. Friday evening came without fanfare. Kyle returned to the same corner grocery store, not out of necessity, but curiosity. The place was far removed from the sleek stores his assistant usually shopped. There were hand-painted signs in the window, bins of produce out front, the scent of baked bread drifting through automatic doors that squeaked when they opened. He told himself he needed coffee, but the truth was simpler. He was hoping to see her again, and he did. She was outside, loading paper bags into the trunk of a dusty hatchback. Her sleeves were rolled up. Her hands moved with that same quiet precision. She hummed as she worked, not for anyone to hear, just for herself. She paused to adjust a flower pot on the back seat, careful not to crush the petals. Kyle watched from inside his car. Something about her unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in the way still water reflects your face too clearly. He didn't get out, didn't approach. He just sat there until she drove off again, and for the first time in months he smiled, not fully, just a flicker. But it was real. Alara knew someone was watching. She didn't look directly, but she felt it. She'd felt eyes on her a few days earlier too, when she dropped her basket in the dairy aisle. It was brief, but the presence lingered, not threatening, just curious. She told herself it was nothing. Her life was simple now, and she liked it that way. After losing her mother the year before, Alara had stepped back from everything. Big plans, fast timelines, even relationships. They all felt too heavy, too loud. Nature, on the other hand, was patient. A seed didn't bloom overnight. It needed care. She had learned to live the same way. One slow, honest day at a time. Kale returned again the next week. This time he stood in the aisle and stared blankly at a shelf of herbal teas. He didn't drink tea. Never had. But she walked by him, close enough for her shoulder to nearly graze his arm. She didn't notice him. She was on the phone, laughing softly, holding a small box of honey sticks and a jar of almond butter. He stepped back, letting her pass, his gaze following her as she disappeared down the aisle. That laugh, it stayed with him. He didn't know her name yet, didn't even know why she lingered in his mind the way she did. But he knew the feeling in his chest wasn't cold. Back in Green Park, Alara wiped the counter of her small kitchen. A vase of lilies sat in the center, slightly drooped. She made a mental note to trim the stems. Her fridge held little more than oat milk, fresh greens, and a forgotten tub of hummus. She didn't mind. Dinner would be simple, roasted carrots, some lentils. She ate like she lived, clean, intentional, unfussy. As she lit a candle, her phone buzzed. A text from Annie again. Still working? Come by for tea. I got that new hibiscus one you like. Alara smiled and texted back. Let me finish this sketch. 20 minutes? She took her tea in small, quiet doses, like truth. A few days later, Kyle entered the grocery store again. It was becoming a ritual. Something about the place made him feel less untouchable. He wore plain clothes this time. No tailored coat, no luxury cufflinks, just jeans, a gray Henley, and a jacket that hadn't seen daylight in years. He stood in line behind her. Alara. She was juggling a carton of eggs, 2 apples, and a small bag of almonds. He watched her fingers, the way she balanced each item carefully. Her keys clinked in her coat pocket. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes. When one apple slipped, he caught it. Without a word, he handed it back to her. Their eyes met. For the first time, and everything slowed. Her gaze lingered, curious, but not startled. His was steady, soft in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. "Thanks," she said, voice light. He nodded once. She paid and left. He blinked. "Right. Sorry." That night, Alara sat in her studio and tried to finish a sketch of Milk Thistle. But her hands kept stopping. She kept seeing those eyes. Kyle returned home later than usual. He didn't turn on the news, didn't check his email. He sat on his balcony, sipping water, phone untouched. The woman at the grocery store, he hadn't even gotten her name, but her face stayed with him like a song you hum without knowing the words. For a man who had built everything by design, this felt like the first unscripted moment in years. What do you think? Can people from 2 different worlds really fall in love? Let me know in the comments. The third time Kyle saw her, it wasn't through a window or across an aisle. It was with the jolt of a sudden thud and the unmistakable crunch of metal. He had just pulled into the small grocery lot, turning slowly into the last available space when her car, backing out without warning, clipped his front bumper. The sound wasn't loud, just enough to stop both cars. Kyle's hands froze on the wheel. For a second he didn't move. Then he saw her jump out, Alara again, arms flailing slightly, wide-eyed, already apologizing before their eyes even met. "Oh no, 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 no," she murmured, rushing to his door. "I am so sorry. I thought the spot was clear. I didn't see you. Ugh, this is totally my fault. It wasn't serious. Neither was he, at least not about this. I've had worse," he said, brushing his coat back casually. "No injuries, no explosions. Could have been worse." She blinked, uncertain if he was joking. "You're not mad?" He looked at her then, full in the face. "No," he said. "It's a car. It can be fixed." She let out a breath, visibly relieved. "Thank you. Seriously. Some people would have lost their minds." "You looked more upset than I did," he replied. "Well, you didn't have a cactus in the back seat. It tipped. There are spikes in my yoga mat now." That made him laugh, just once, but real. "Cactus?" he echoed. "Don't ask," she said with a wince. "I have a thing for strange plants." "I can tell," he said, eyeing the dangling vine on her dashboard. "You keep a greenhouse in there?" "I call it eco-chaos," she replied. "It's a lifestyle." He laughed again. They exchanged insurance info, though Kyle waved off repairs. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'll handle it." "Are you sure?" He nodded, but something made him linger. "I'm Kyle, by the way," he said. "Alara." He repeated her name softly, like trying it on for size. "Alara. That's different. I blame my mom," she said. "She wanted something unique. I think it means joy in some language." Kyle raised a brow. "Fitting." She smiled. A small, caught-off-guard kind of smile. He nodded toward the store. "Still planning to shop? Or is this the grand finale of your day?" "I need eggs," she said. "And I'm out of almond milk." He hesitated, then gestured toward the entrance. "Walk in together?" She looked surprised. "Sure. They didn't say much inside." She moved down the aisles quickly, comfortable, focused. He followed slowly, not entirely sure why he was still there. At checkout, she turned to him. "Well, I guess this makes us parking lot friends now. Is that a thing?" "It is if we meet again." He smiled. "Let's find out." 2 days later, they did. This time it was a corner cafe. Kyle had just stepped inside for a black coffee when he noticed her at the counter, chatting with the barista like they were old friends. She turned, saw him, and paused. "Hey, look who's not driving today," she said. "I figured it was safer for the plants," he replied. She laughed. "Good memory." He nodded toward the counter. "What do you recommend?" "I usually just order whatever sounds least complicated." "Try the lavender latte," she said. "Don't look at me like that, it's good. And calming." He raised a brow. "Do I look like someone who needs calming? You look like someone who hasn't taken a real breath in a while." That stopped him. Not in an offended way. In a noticed way. Kyle stepped forward at the same time. 2 hands reached, 1 cup. They both froze. The barista chuckled. "Oops. 1 moment." You're stealing my calming potion, she teased. Maybe I need it more than you do. She took a sip of his plain black coffee and made a face. You drink this willingly. It keeps me grounded. She handed his cup back. Try mine. I expected worse. You're welcome, she said with a small smirk. They sat across from each other near the window. It wasn't planned. It wasn't awkward either. It just happened. He asked about her illustrations. She shared a little, careful not to talk too much. He admitted he worked in finance but didn't elaborate. There was no pretense, no trying. It was light and strange and oddly easy. Kyle had sat across from dozens of people in his life, most of them powerful, some of them ruthless, all of them guarded. But none of them ever made him forget what time it was. With Alara, minutes folded into each other. There wasn't a dramatic spark, no heavy flirtation, just moments that felt oddly open. She spoke with her hands, laughed at her own stories, and didn't seem to care whether he was impressed. She didn't even ask what he did for a living. That alone was new. So what is it exactly that you illustrate? He asked. Plants, she said. Like house plants? Mostly. Herbs, flowers, native species. I draw what people overlook, because they're quiet and they matter anyway. Cale didn't respond right away. Something about that answer got under his skin. In a good way. You really believe that? I do. She glanced at him. You look like someone who's forgotten how to slow down. I haven't had much reason to. She sipped her drink. Maybe that's the problem. When they stepped outside, Alara walked him to his car before realizing she had parked on the opposite end of the lot. They both paused. Guess I should have paid more attention, she said, laughing at herself. I'll walk you there, Kyle offered. You don't have to. I want to. They moved slowly, no rush. The evening air had turned crisp, brushing against their sleeves. So, she said, you're not going to tell me what you actually do. He glanced over. Would it change how you see me? Depends. Are you a dentist? He smirked. No. Lobbyist? Debt collector? He chuckled softly. Touché. They reached her car. She opened the door and set her bag inside, then turned back to face him. I'm glad you like lavender lattes now, she said. I didn't say I liked it. You didn't spit it out either. He laughed. Fair. They stood there, neither moving yet. She leaned on the door. This was nice. I mean, for a guy who got hit by my car. You're surprisingly easy to talk to. For someone who carries a cactus in the back seat, you're surprisingly grounded. That made her laugh again. Soft. Full. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sketch, handing it to him without explanation. A simple pencil drawing of a wild daisy. No charge, she said. For the bumper. He took it slowly. Thank you. Cale didn't go home right away. He drove around for a while, windows down, the paper in the passenger seat fluttering with each turn. The drawing wasn't perfect. A smudge at the corner, a slightly uneven line near the stem, but it felt alive, like someone had seen the flower and cared enough to remember it. He tucked it into his coat pocket and drove on, quieter inside than he had been in months. Alara stood in her studio that night, still in her coat. She looked out the window, fingers to her lips. She didn't understand what just happened. She wasn't looking for anything, not a conversation, not a connection. Definitely not someone like him. Tall, unreadable, the kind of man who probably made 1,000 decisions a day that impacted lives. But when he looked at her, it didn't feel like he was calculating anything. It felt like he was searching for something real, and surprised to have found it. 2 lives had brushed, awkwardly and unexpectedly. No promises, no grand gestures. Just 2 people walking away from a small accident, carrying more than they expected. They didn't fall fast, they fell slowly, over mismatched coffee orders, shared glances in checkout lines, and one spontaneous trip to a street art fair where neither knew what they were looking at, but both knew they wanted to be there. Together. Kyle stopped checking his watch when he was with her. Alara stopped second-guessing her words. There was no performance between them, just presence. One Saturday, they sat side by side at an old bookstore downtown. The air was thick with the scent of paper and binding glue. Alara ran her fingers along the spines, head tilted in thought. Kyle handed her a copy of a plant identification guide. You keep rescuing them. Might as well learn their names. She smirked. I already know their names. I just like seeing how wrong these books get them. They sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through pages. Her laugh came easy that day. His eyes never left her face. Another time she invited him up to her rooftop with a thermos of tea and a blanket that barely covered them both. The sun had set behind a curtain of orange and indigo, and the city below buzzed with its usual noise, but from up there it sounded distant, small. Alara pointed at constellations with one hand and held her tea in the other. Kyle listened, not to the stars, to her. When she leaned her head on his shoulder, he didn't speak. He didn't want the moment to end. Just days that turned into nights, and a comfort that crept into their lives like a forgotten melody returning. Kyle found himself showing up more often, sometimes with her favorite ginger cookies, other times just to sit near her while she painted, saying nothing, doing nothing. He'd never had quiet that felt full before. One Thursday, Alara stopped in the middle of chopping basil and said, "You never talk about your family." Kyle looked up from where he sat at her tiny kitchen table. "There's not much to say. There's always something," she said gently. He hesitated. "My father died when I was 12, he said. Heart failure, sudden. He was kind, the kind of man who would have loved your garden." She leaned against the counter waiting. My mother. She filled the space after that, with rules, expectations. Nothing was ever enough unless it looked a certain way. She has a way of making you feel small, even when you're achieving everything she asked for. Alara walked over and placed a hand on his. "You're not small." He met her eyes. "She would have hated you. I would have waved." They both smiled. But Kale's didn't last long. "Sometimes I think I don't know how to love the right way," he said. "Like I've been shaped wrong." Alara shook her head. "You just needed someone who didn't ask you to perform for it." That night, he kissed her forehead before leaving, not her lips. Her forehead, as if he wasn't sure yet if he deserved more. Their first kiss came later, and it wasn't planned. It came after they'd been caught in the middle of a community event downtown. Booths everywhere, music. Someone gave her a balloon. She laughed so hard when it floated away. Alara tilted her head up. "I think we're about to get drenched. We should get under something," Kyle said. "No," she said, holding out her arms. "It's not that bad." Seconds later it started. Light at first, then steady. People ran for cover. Vendors closed tents, but she stayed still, blinking up at the sky, drenched but glowing. He stood across from her, frozen for a second, watching her, trying to memorize the way she smiled through it all. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward. Hands gently cradled her face. She looked up, eyes wide. He didn't ask, he just leaned in. Their lips met, damp, warm, sure, not rushed, not dramatic, just right. Kale didn't pull away immediately. When the kiss ended, they stood close, forehead to forehead, the steady patter around them washing the world quiet. No words, none were needed. Later, at her apartment, Alara handed him a towel and a change of clothes she'd once bought from a local vendor. Wide, soft cotton pants and a faded t-shirt with a botanical sketch on the front. He didn't question it. He wore the clothes. She lit a candle. They dried off. She made tea. Everything was slow, intentional, without pretense. They sat together on her couch, legs touching, her head on his chest, listening to the hum of her small heater and the sound of rain tapping softly outside. "Kyle," she said quietly, her fingers tracing a line across his forearm. "Can I tell you something without you reacting right away?" He felt his chest tighten slightly. "Of course." She sat up, not moving far, just enough to see his face. Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them. She didn't rush to fill the space that followed. She let him absorb it. His first instinct wasn't fear. It wasn't joy either. It was stillness. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. "I am now." There was no trembling in her tone, no apology in her eyes. "I wasn't sure how to tell you. I didn't even know if I should. But I didn't want to lie, and I didn't want to wait." "How long have you known?" he asked. 4 weeks. "Why now?" "Because I wanted you to see me first, not just the situation." Kyle looked down at her hand resting near his. He took it gently. "I don't know what kind of father I'd be," he admitted. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "I didn't tell you to force anything. I just didn't want to carry the truth alone." He let out a slow breath. "I'm not walking away," he said. She didn't respond right away, just looked at him. She didn't need promises, she just needed honesty. And she got it. Later that night, Cal stood on her balcony. The sky had cleared. City lights blinked in the distance. His thoughts were quiet but steady. Behind him, Alara sat cross-legged on the couch, sketchbook open, pencil moving in soft strokes. He turned slightly, watching her from the doorway. There was a kind of grace in the way she existed, unhurried, whole present. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to defend his place. He just wanted to stay. Serafina Duval didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. People adjusted themselves when she entered a room, not because she demanded it, but because they sensed it was expected. Her presence was quiet and composed, but never warm. Not soft, just arranged, precisely like her home. Her driver opened the back door as she stepped out in a slate-gray coat, gloves tucked under one arm, a phone in hand that she never looked away from as she entered the building. Kyle was waiting in the private lounge of the club she insisted on using for all their meetings. No staff, no public ears, just polished wood, velvet chairs, and the occasional glint of silver on fine porcelain. "Mother," Kyle said as she approached. Serafina pressed her cheek lightly to his, never fully touching him. "You're early," she said. I asked you to be on time. Early is yours to manage." Kyle let it pass. She sat, gesturing for tea. It arrived within seconds, of course. "I heard your name mentioned, in connection with a sustainability event," she said, voice smooth, eyes unreadable. "Is that correct?" "Alara was invited," Kyle replied. "She's organizing? She's illustrating. Some kind of botanical branding work." Serafina tilted her head ever so slightly. "How involved are you?" She waited until later that evening to begin. Alone in her study, she sat beside a small writing desk, elegant fingers tapping at her phone. First, a message to an associate at a tech security firm. Then, a call to a private investigator she kept on retainer. Her instructions were clean, legal, in theory. Ethical? That had never concerned her. "Find everything," she said. "Social media, past jobs, photos, friends. I want access to her text history. Anything with Kale's number or name." The voice on the other end hesitated. "That's highly restrictive data. We can look for deleted caches, pull metadata." "Do it," she said, ending the call. 2 days later, she had what she needed. Not real evidence, not truth, but enough pieces to reshape a story. A few vague messages from Alara's phone were taken out of context. One from a contact labeled Dan Reed. "Thanks for the night talk. I really needed that." Another, weeks earlier. "Can't believe I'm late again. Don't tell Kay." Both innocent, but not in Serafina's hands. She forwarded the screenshots to her team and instructed them to alter the sender IDs, just slightly, enough to remove ambiguity. The version she planned to show Kyle would look like an admission. Next, she paid a visit to a man named Clay Peterson. He ran a boutique consulting firm that doubled as a cover for several of Serafina's more discreet requests over the years. "I need an actor," she said. "Not a performer, a presence, clean appearance, good memory." Clay nodded. "Role? Is it?" Serafina's face didn't move. "That's not relevant." He nodded again. "We'll find the right match." By the end of the week, everything was in place. Text messages, forged, photos, staged, the actor, briefed. She reviewed it all personally, correcting small details, ensuring that nothing pointed directly to her involvement. It had to appear as though the evidence simply came to Kyle. Discovered, not delivered. That was how belief worked. It had to feel earned. Kyle didn't expect a knock on his office door that morning. "Special delivery," his assistant said, handing him a thick manila envelope with no sender listed. Inside were 2 printed screenshots. The messages, the ones Serafina had carefully engineered. "Can't believe I'm late again. Don't tell Kay. Thanks for the night talk. I really needed that." They weren't explosive on their own, but they were suggestive, enough to breed questions, enough to bruise trust. He stared at them, lips pressed thin. He didn't want to believe them. But they were from Alara's number. That evening his mother called. She never asked about Alara directly. She simply said, "Darling, do you ever consider the cost of being too generous with your heart?" Kyle remained quiet. "I worry that you're romanticizing this woman. She may not be the person you think she is. She's not a woman." "She's Alara," he replied coldly. Serafina sighed. "Exactly." She welcomed him inside with a kiss on the cheek, the way she always did. but he was quieter. He watched her more closely. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said too quickly. They ate in silence. She talked about a client meeting. He nodded, responded with short answers. Something had shifted, and Alara felt it. "You're Kyle, right?" the man asked. Kyle turned. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I doubt it," the man replied. "But you probably want answers." Kyle narrowed his eyes. "Alara," the man said. "She and I, it was brief. But I think you should know the timeline of her pregnancy doesn't exactly line up the way she might have told you." There it was. Kyle didn't respond right away. The man didn't press. He handed over a small printed photo. Another forgery. Alara and him in a cafe, angled to appear closer than they were. "We were seeing each other early this year," the man added. "Before she ghosted. I figured she moved on. Guess I know to who." Kyle stared at the photo. He didn't want to believe, but the texts, the messages, now this. Doubt builds like frost, silent and slow. Had he imagined everything? He replayed their moments together, line by line, looking for signs he hadn't seen before. Pauses, dodged questions, unexplained absences. But there had been none. Still, when you've grown up in a house where nothing was ever fully yours, not even your joy, it's hard to trust what feels good. What if this was just another illusion, another mistake? His mother's voice echoed from the past. When people want something from you, they'll always smile first. He didn't call Alara that night, didn't text, didn't show up. Alara sat on her rooftop alone, phone in hand, eyes on the sky. The wind was colder than usual. The knock came late. Alara wasn't expecting anyone. She had paint on her hands, basil simmering on the stove, and her favorite playlist drifting through the air. When she opened the door and saw Kyle, something in her chest tightened. His eyes were tired, shoulders tense. He didn't lean in for a kiss. He didn't smile. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded slowly, stepping aside. Instead, he set a folded paper on the counter, her brow furrowed. "Where did this come from?" "Answer me," he said, voice sharp now. "Were you with him?" She looked at him fully. "Kale, I don't even know who this is. Don't lie to me. I'm not." He pulled out his phone, tapping quickly, held it up. More photos, a cropped message, a fake thread. "Kale, these aren't real. You sent those messages." "No, I didn't." He stepped back, shaking his head like he didn't want to hear her. "I trusted you," he said, "with everything I had left." She moved closer. "Then believe me now. I've never cheated on you. I've never lied to you. That child is yours." Kyle's face hardened. "You're sure?" The question wasn't loud, but it was worse than yelling. It cut through her. Her hands trembled. "Yes." Without question, he looked away. And that silence, that stillness, it told her everything. Not enough. Not when it mattered. "I can't do this," she whispered, stepping back. Kyle ran a hand down his face. "I just need time. I need to make sense of this." Alara shook her head slowly. "You want time to decide whether I'm lying about the life growing inside me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Her voice broke. "How could you even ask that?" "I saw things," he said. "Messages, a man who—" "A stranger showed up with a story and a photo, and that's all it took for you to look at me like I'm disposable? That's not fair." "You know what's not fair?" she said, voice trembling. "Carrying your child, thinking we were building something honest, only to be treated like I'm trying to trap you." He stepped toward her. "Alara, please. No, don't touch me." He froze. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I gave you my whole heart," she said. "Even when I was scared, even when I knew you were still figuring out how to let someone in." Silence. "I trusted you more than I've trusted anyone in years," she said, voice quieter now. "And you believed a stranger over me." Kale swallowed hard. "I don't know what's real right now." Her face crumpled, just for a moment. But it was enough. "I do," she said. "I know what's real." She turned, walked to the bedroom, grabbed a small canvas bag, and began stuffing things inside. Kale moved to stop her. "What are you doing?" "Leaving. Alara, please." She stopped at the doorway. "I can forgive a lot, Kale, but not this. Not being doubted. Not when it mattered most. Not being treated like a threat. When she had only ever been his home. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Drop it in the comments. Your story might help someone else who's been through the same thing. The door didn't slam. It closed with a quiet finality that somehow hurt more. Kyle stood in the middle of the apartment, his hands limp at his sides, staring at the space where she had been just seconds before. The scent of her cooking still hung in the air. Basil, something citrusy. There was a kettle still on the stove, a half-sliced tomato on the counter, her phone charger plugged in near the wall. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. He stepped forward, then back, then dropped into the nearest chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. His mind screamed, "You should have stopped her." But he didn't, because even if he had, what would he have said? That he needed time to believe her? That he wasn't sure if the child she carried was his? That he trusted what strangers said more than the look in her eyes? No apology could fix what he'd broken. Alara didn't cry until she reached the end of the block. She sat behind the wheel of her car, one hand clutching the steering wheel, the other pressed against her belly. She wasn't even sure where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. Her breaths came in uneven waves. Her chest ached. Her heart felt like it had folded in on itself. She had fought so hard to keep her life simple, safe, and she let him in anyway. Not just into her home, but into her hope. Now it all felt wasted. No, not wasted, because she still had one thing that mattered, one truth that no one could take from her. The life growing inside her was good. It was wanted. It was hers, even if she had to raise it alone. Kyle sat for over an hour without moving. The apartment felt colder now. The walls, once filled with her drawings and plants, now stared back at him like strangers. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once held her face with care, now empty, useless. He wanted to believe he had been tricked, not by her, but by what he saw, by the evidence, by the stranger's calm explanation. But a part of him, deep down, already knew. But in belief, he had chosen suspicion over faith, fear over love, and Alara had seen it in his eyes before he could even deny it. Alara didn't go home that night. She drove across town to Annie's apartment. The moment Annie opened the door and saw her friend's face, she knew. "No," she whispered. "He didn't." Alara nodded, tears falling silently. Annie pulled her into a hug, wrapping her arms tightly around her. "I've got you," she said. "You're not alone." Alara didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Back in his apartment, Kale finally moved. He grabbed the photo that had started it all, the one with the man Alara supposedly knew, and stared at it again. There was something off. The angle, the lighting, the distance. The man's posture didn't suggest familiarity. Alara's eyes weren't even focused on him. She was looking at something outside the frame. She hadn't lied. She had begged him to see that, and he didn't. Cal stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor behind him. He crossed the room and pulled open the drawer where he had tucked away the screenshots, the fake messages. He spread them out on the table, eyes scanning for anything that could prove something, anything. But all they gave him was guilt. They didn't hold truth. They held his weakness, his willingness to doubt her just because someone handed him a reason to. In a quiet bedroom across town, Alara curled onto Annie's couch, hand resting over the gentle curve of her stomach. It was early still, but she felt it, the heartbeat, the weight, the promise. This child would be born without a father, not because he died, or because he ran, but because he chose not to believe. Alara didn't plan to disappear, but grief doesn't always ask for permission. 2 days after she left Kale's apartment, she told Annie she needed to go, not just out of the city, away. "Where?" Annie asked, standing in the middle of the guest bedroom Alara had barely slept in. Alara folded a shirt slowly. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows me. You don't have to run." "I'm not running," she said softly. "I'm protecting myself." Annie didn't argue, because she understood what it meant to be broken in private. She didn't leave a note for Kyle. She didn't owe him one. Not after that. Green Park became a memory. The neighbors, the grocery store, the rooftop garden, all of it slipped behind her as she crossed the state line. She landed in a town with no history, a place where no one asked questions. A rental above a bookstore became her new home. The space was small but warm. The windows let in light. The floors were uneven. She didn't mind. She hung one of her own prints on the wall, a simple ink sketch of a wild chamomile flower. For strength, for calm, for what she still carried. The mornings were hardest. The space next to her in bed, now just rumpled sheets. The craving for ginger tea in Kyl's voice gone. The ache of what could have been, still fresh. But pain has its own rhythm. It doesn't stay sharp forever. Eventually it dulls, enough for movement. Alara spent her afternoons drawing. She submitted her work to small eco-markets and wellness shops. One store responded, then another. Soon she was mailing out custom designs, herbal packaging, botanical wall prints, reusable labels for plant-based beauty brands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Every line she drew felt like a promise to her child. I will build us something, even from nothing. Annie called every week. Still no word from him? You'd tell me if he tried. But she didn't expect him to. Whatever doubt he had about her, it was louder than any love he claimed to feel. Back in Chicago, Kyle moved like a shadow in a suit. His office had never been quieter. His assistant stopped asking if he wanted lunch. He rarely ate during the day. Meetings, reports, proposals, expansion strategy. He drowned in it. People praised his focus. The board applauded his numbers. Investors marveled at how he didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't stumble. But none of them saw the man behind the numbers, the one who went home to silence, who stood in the middle of his living room, surrounded by glass and hide and absolutely nothing that mattered. He tried once, 3 weeks after Alara left, to go back to her apartment. The landlord said the lease had been canceled, forwarding address unknown. He stood outside for a long time. The window where her basil plant used to sit was empty now, so he left, without knocking, without asking, because part of him believed he didn't deserve to find her. He threw himself deeper into the company. 12-hour days became 14. He stopped returning personal calls, stopped answering his mother, messages. He didn't yell, he didn't rage, he simply went quiet. Serafina noticed. Of course she did. At their next scheduled dinner, she made a comment. You look pale, she said, slicing into her meal. I've been working, Kyle replied. Still no news from the girl? Kyle's eyes flicked up cold. Don't call her that. Serafina's fork paused. She was hardly transparent, Kyle. You think that because you made it look that way. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Kyle set down his knife. You sent that man, didn't you? I have no idea what you're talking about. You always do. Silence stretched between them. Then Serafina said, You're emotional. It's clouding your judgment. He left the restaurant without finishing his meal, and that was the last time they spoke for weeks. But he carried her absence like a second skin. He saw her in places she'd never been, in women with the same hair, the same laugh, the same tilt of the head. He told himself it was better this way. She was safer. He couldn't hurt her anymore. Alara had never meant to start a business. At first it was simply therapy, drawing to fill the silence, colors to fill the ache. But over time, her work began to resonate. A friend of the bookstore owner hung one of her prints in a yoga studio. Someone else saw it and asked for a custom illustration for their organic tea label. She created a small brand, Winslow Botanicals, delicate hand-drawn prints on seed paper, labels that could be planted, commissions from sustainable product makers, all from a quiet room above a store that smelled of cedar and old fiction. There were days when Alara still cried, not often, but when the baby kicked and she felt alone, when a certain cologne reminded her of him, when she wondered how someone could love you so deeply and still believe the worst about you. She let the tears fall, and then she kept going, because every time she placed a hand on her belly, she was reminded, this life deserves peace. Even if mine was taken, she chose to have a midwife. No hospital gowns, no sterile rooms. She wanted a birth filled with care and calm, not fear. She made a playlist, packed a small basket, wrote letters for her child to read one day. In one of them she wrote, You were born from love. Even if it didn't survive, you were always wanted. Kyle had no such grounding. He was winning contracts in Tokyo and Dubai, shaking hands with political leaders, expanding into green technology. But when the applause faded, he still went home alone. His penthouse overlooked the city. Glass walls, automated lights, curated silence. Sometimes he would sit in the dark and stare out over the skyline, wondering what she was seeing at that very moment. Did she think of him? Did she hate him? Was the child okay? He didn't know, and the not knowing was slowly undoing everything inside him. It had started small, a whisper in the back of his mind, a question, a feeling, a gnawing suspicion that something hadn't been right. He began reviewing things, digging through old messages, cross-checking the timeline. The texts his mother had shown him. They didn't match Alara's typing style. The grammar was wrong, the slang unfamiliar. He found a timestamp inconsistency. He found a restaurant receipt that proved Alara had been somewhere else the night Serafina claimed she was meeting the other man. He started to feel sick. What if it had all been false? What if he had burned the only person who had ever truly loved him, because he let his mother light the match? Cale stopped going into the office. He began turning down interviews, declined speaking engagements. His team said he was exhausted. The press called it a strategic pause. But Cale knew the truth. He couldn't pretend anymore. He sat on his sofa, night after night, reading old texts, watching the one video he still had, Alara laughing, brushing paint off her arm. It made his chest tighten every time. He didn't cry. Not yet. But the cracks were widening. Alara, meanwhile, began to bloom. Not loudly, not publicly, but in the quiet way trees do in spring, roots deepening, leaves slowly unfolding. Her work expanded. She created an online presence. Her pregnancy blog began getting attention from eco-moms and wellness advocates. She was invited to speak at a virtual panel on sustainable motherhood. She was nervous, but she said yes. The host had seen her art online and insisted, "You're creating more than products. You're building peace." Alara smiled at that. Peace. That's all she ever wanted. She spoke gently, with truth, talked about how healing wasn't a straight line, how being misunderstood didn't mean she had to lose herself, how love didn't always end the way it began, but that didn't make it less real. Somewhere in the city, Kyle sat on his couch, flipping channels, half asleep, drink untouched on the table. And then, his chest tightened. On the screen, a feature story on sustainable small businesses. There she was, alive, glowing, confident, holding a small drawing board in her lap, her hands resting just below her bump. Cale's entire body froze. She smiled at the interviewer, spoke about new beginnings, about finding light after disappointment, about choosing grace. Kyle's mouth went dry. She looked the same, no, stronger. There was something different in her, a fire forged through pain, and there it was, on her lap, a tiny sock, the kind knit from soft cotton. Their child. Cale didn't cry right away. At first it was disbelief, then the slow, brutal wave of knowing, of realization. He dropped the remote, fell to his knees, and wept, not like a titan of industry, not like a man used to control, but like someone who finally understood the cost of listening to the wrong voice. He had believed a lie, and in doing so, he had shattered a truth that might never return. Do you think time can truly heal broken trust, or are some things never the same once broken? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters. Kyle didn't plan to turn on the television that night. The silence in his penthouse had become a second skin, quiet enough to muffle guilt, dim enough to blur memory. He poured a drink out of habit, not desire, and sank into the leather couch like a man sinking beneath the weight of his own choices. He flicked through the channels with no aim. News, sports, static laughter from sitcoms that didn't land. His eyes glazed over until a familiar sound cut through the noise. A laugh, soft, bright, real. His thumb froze on the remote. He knew that laugh. His body knew it before his brain caught up. A local program filled the screen, one of those community highlight shows that ran unnoticed during late hours. A cheerful host sat beside a woman on a small couch, surrounded by potted greenery and watercolor paintings. Kyle's heart slammed against his ribs. Alara. She hadn't changed, not where it mattered. Her hair had grown, her smile carried the same gentle curve, and her posture held a grace born not from wealth, but from surviving. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were stronger, sadder, wiser, and in her arms, resting against her chest, was a child, a baby, his child. Kyle set the glass down slowly, every movement now trembling. "We're here with Alara Winslow," the host said, an artist and small business owner who turned personal adversity into a thriving botanical illustration company. Ilara, tell us about that journey. Ilara looked down at the baby in her arms, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Then she looked up, smile calm but bittersweet. I left Chicago when I was pregnant, she began. It was a complicated time. I had to start over. Kyle didn't blink. I began sketching again to cope, she said, her voice steady. Nature has a way of reminding us that even after something breaks, it still grows back, sometimes differently, sometimes stronger. Kyle's hand covered his mouth. His chest ached. This was the life she built without him. The child blinked sleepily at the camera, a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 months old. Full cheeks, familiar eyes, there was no denying it. That was his son. I didn't know what I was doing at first, she continued. I just knew I wanted to raise my child in peace, without fear, without bitterness. That's how Winslow Botanicals was born. The host smiled. You've come a long way. Ilara nodded. Pain can build you or bury you. I chose to let it build. Tears slipped down his face, silent, unannounced. He hadn't cried in years. Not at boardroom defeats, not at his father's funeral, not even the night Ilara left. But now, with her face glowing on a small screen and their son asleep in her arms, he shattered. He pressed pause on the remote. Her image froze, lips mid-sentence, the baby curled against her shoulder. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, breath shallow. What had he done? He believed lies instead of the woman who loved him. He chose suspicion over truth. He'd thrown away something pure, not because it wasn't real, but because he was too broken to trust it. He had chased control and in doing so lost everything he didn't know how to keep. Now, he was just a man in a dark apartment, staring at the life he could have had, the life he gave away. Kyle stood, pacing. His hands ran through his hair, pulling at the roots. He felt 20 years older in that moment, not because of time, but because of regret. What had she gone through? Alone, pregnant, hurt by the one person she thought would stand by her. And yet she didn't fall apart. She rebuilt. She loved that child without bitterness. She created something meaningful. While he buried himself in numbers, in noise, in denial, he walked to the window and looked down at the city below, high-rise lights blinking like distant stars. None of it meant anything anymore. Not the money, not the headlines, not the quarterly wins. All of it rang hollow. Kyle returned to the couch. He hit play again. The segment was closing. To anyone out there, Ilara said gently, who's ever been lied about or walked away from, don't let it change who you are. Hold on to the truth. Hold on to your kindness. You'll heal, even if no one apologizes. The screen faded to black. Kyle sat in the silence, heartbeat thudding in his ears. He whispered her name, Ilara. He typed her name into the search bar. Winslow Botanicals. He didn't know what to say. He had to find her. Even if the door stayed shut, he would still try, because what he saw on that screen wasn't just a woman who had moved on. It was a reminder of the man he could have been, and the father he still hoped to become. Kyle had built his empire by knowing where to look. When numbers didn't add up, he drilled deeper. When partnerships felt off, he followed the thread. Yet somehow, when it came to Ilara, he'd accepted lies wrapped in ribbons. Not anymore. The morning after seeing Ilara on television, he didn't go into the office. He canceled his meetings. He ignored messages. Instead, he sat in front of his home computer and opened a file he hadn't looked at in months. The evidence his mother had given him. The supposed texts. The private investigators folder. The photos of Ilara with another man, laughing, leaning close. He examined each piece with the eyes of a man no longer blinded by pride. The first red flag was the text chain. The language didn't sound like her. Too abrupt, too careless. The kind of words someone might think she would use, but not the way she actually spoke. Ilara had always been careful, thoughtful. Even her frustrations had grace. These messages read like a caricature. He pulled up old messages, real ones Ilara had sent during their time together. Her tone was soft, even when sad. Nothing matched. The second flag was the timestamp. The texts supposedly came the same day she'd had lunch with him at the botanical garden. He remembered that day vividly, the picnic, the way she'd fallen asleep in the sun beside him. She hadn't been out of his sight long enough to be texting anyone. His stomach turned. He opened the PI report, the supposed surveillance photos, the captions claiming meetings with another man, locations, dates. But something was off. The photos were taken from odd angles as if staged. One even showed the other man facing the camera, looking straight ahead as if posing. Kyle zoomed in. The man was familiar, not personally, but commercially. He'd seen him in a commercial once, an actor. He closed his eyes, breathing slow and steady. It was all fake. The man wasn't Alara's lover. He was a prop. Serafina Duval had built her life on elegance, charity, and control. Kyle had seen her manipulate board members and charm politicians, but he never thought she'd go this far. He walked into her mansion unannounced. The housekeeper flinched at his cold expression. "Where is she?" He dropped the folder onto the table. "What's this?" she asked. Lie after lie. Her smile faltered, but only slightly. "You've been busy. You forged texts. You paid someone to pretend to be the father. You destroyed the one good thing I ever had." Serafina sighed and placed her teacup down with care. "She would have ruined you, Kale. You're a Duval. You don't belong in backyard, sketches, and flea market fame." He stared at her in disbelief. "You lied to my face. About my child. About the woman I—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "You watched me tear her apart and you let me—" Serafina didn't flinch. "I protected you. Alara didn't understand your world. You never gave her the chance to—" His voice cracked. Serafina folded her hands in her lap, posture straight as ever. "You'll see in time, Kale. What I did for you." He stepped back, suddenly feeling like a stranger in the house he grew up in. "I used to think you were strong," he said. "Now I realize you're just scared, of losing control, of not being the one who decides everything." Her lips tightened. He walked out without another word. Back at home, Kale sat on the floor of his living room, hands resting on his knees. The weight of everything bore down like never before. He didn't just lose Alara. He let her be punished for his inability to question someone who had lied before. Just never about something so cruel. He needed help. Real help. Not advisors. Not publicists. Not the usual orbit of yes-men and brand fixers. He made an appointment. The therapist's office was small, warm, no chrome, no sterile lighting. Kyle sat in the leather chair across from a woman with silver hair and no notebook. "I don't know how to start," he admitted. "You just did," she said. He told her everything. Not just about Alara, but about his father, his mother, the expectations, the silences, the constant performance of power, of control, of not needing anyone. She listened. He talked. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone heard him, really heard him. He left the session with no solutions, no strategy. But he felt lighter, and he knew the path forward wouldn't be paved with grand apologies or public confessions. It would be quiet, deliberate, earned. Kyle didn't rush. He didn't hire an army of investigators. He didn't make calls to PR agencies or private tech firms to trace Alara's address. That was the old way, the hollow way, the one that would only push her further away. Instead, he started small. Her business, Winslow Botanicals, had a modest website with a contact form and a P.O. box in a small Indiana town. No phone number, no press, just soft colors, hand-painted leaves, and a tagline, "Grown from Grace." Kale stared at it for a long time. He could have sent a message right away, typed out an apology, attached a bank transfer for everything she'd missed. But none of that felt right. She hadn't built this out of spite. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't brand her story into trauma marketing. She simply moved forward, on her own terms. So Kyle began his approach the same way, quietly. He placed a small order from her site, a custom hand-illustrated set of thank you cards. He used only his initials and a separate delivery address. He didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. 2 weeks later, the package arrived, wrapped in recycled craft paper, tied with a green ribbon and a handwritten note inside. "Thank you for supporting small business. Alara." Her handwriting hadn't changed. He stared at it for a long time, then tucked it away in a drawer, beside the ultrasound photo he never deleted. He ordered again a month later, then once more. Never overbearing, never personal, just present. A quiet presence in the space where noise once lived. Meanwhile, he kept attending therapy. Each session unspooled a new layer. The conversations were hard, about why he always had to be right, why he feared being seen as weak, why he trusted logic over love. He admitted that, somewhere deep down, part of him always expected Alara to leave, because everyone eventually did. So when his mother planted the lie, it fit the script already running in his head. "She didn't betray you," his therapist said gently one day. "Your fear did, and you let it." Kyle nodded, jaw tight. "I want to fix it, then be willing to accept that she may never let you, but do it anyway." He started journaling, not for anyone to read, but to untangle his thoughts. At first it was stiff, like writing quarterly reports, but slowly, emotion bled through the ink. He wrote about the way Alara used to hum while she painted, the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at the plants on her windowsill, the time she tried to teach him how to watercolor and ended up with more pigment on her hands than the paper. He wrote to remember, not just what they were, but who he was when he was with her, someone better. A few months passed. The orders continued. Still no direct response, but he didn't expect one. He wasn't doing this for a reward. One day, an unexpected email came through, from an address linked to Winslow Botanicals. Short, careful. "I've noticed your name on a few orders. I don't know if it's really you, but if it is, why now?" Kyle stared at the screen. He waited an hour before replying, then wrote, "Because I was wrong. Because I listened to the wrong voice, and it cost me everything I loved. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know I believe you now." He signed it simply, KL. But that was okay. Some doors don't swing open all at once. They creak, they hesitate, they test the weather. He had no right to knock loudly, but he would wait. He reached out to a few charitable foundations, anonymously, and donated to programs supporting single mothers starting businesses. One organization even received a hand-painted card to thank the mysterious donor. Kyle kept that card in his drawer too. Redemption isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's one quiet apology at a time. What's the hardest apology you've ever given or received? Drop it in the comments. Someone out there might need to know it's possible to heal. Kyle didn't expect to see her that day. He was walking through a small weekend market on the outskirts of Indianapolis, not for work, not for show, just walking. It had become a habit, going to places that didn't demand anything from him. No one recognized him here. No one cared about last quarter's profit margins. The market was buzzing softly, children tugging at parents' hands, a saxophonist playing near a pretzel stand, couples drifting between booths. That's when he saw it. A small white tent, tucked between two larger displays, hand-painted signs, botanical prints hanging from wire clips, and her, Alara. She stood behind a table, arranging a stack of illustrated journals. Her hair was longer now, pulled back, her eyes focused, her posture calm. There was strength in the way she moved, a kind of quiet certainty he hadn't seen before. Kyle's breath caught. He didn't approach, not immediately. He stood at a distance, pretending to browse a nearby stall, watching, waiting. She didn't see him. When she turned to help a customer, Kyle took a slow step forward, then another, until he stood at the edge of her booth. She glanced up. The moment their eyes met, everything stopped. Just the space between them, thick with memory. Alara blinked, didn't explain. "Hi," he said simply. Her fingers tightened slightly around the pen she was holding. She looked at him, not with anger, not with affection, with caution. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I didn't know you'd be here," he replied honestly. She looked away for a second, nodding slightly, like she was deciding something internally. He nodded too. "I saw you on TV months ago," he added. I'm working," she said, almost apologetically. A few seconds passed. She looked at her table, then back at him. "I hope you're doing well," she said, polite but distant. He nodded. "I am now." Alara gave a small, unreadable smile, the kind people offer when they're not ready to feel anything more. "Take care, Kyle." He stepped back and walked away. He didn't sleep that night. He wasn't angry or surprised. He didn't blame her. But something about her voice stayed with him. The calm strength in it, the unshaken dignity. She hadn't folded under the weight of what happened. She had rebuilt, alone. The following week, Kyle returned to her business website. He clicked through the store, this time not as a silent customer, but as someone with purpose. He noticed a few areas that could use back-end help. SEO optimization, delivery tracking, payment integration, all things he understood. He contacted a freelance agency and quietly paid for minor improvements. Everything was anonymous. He had no interest in taking credit, no intention of disrupting her peace. He simply wanted to support her growth. Behind the scenes, without fanfare, without expectation. A few weeks later, she received an email from her web hosting service. Your site's back-end speed has been improved via a third-party optimization upgrade. No action needed on your part. All services prepaid. Enjoy the smoother experience. Alara stared at the message, puzzled. She hadn't requested anything. She opened her site. Everything did load faster. The checkout page was cleaner. Her dashboard analytics were working now. She didn't know who had done it, but she had a feeling. Kyle kept going to therapy. He didn't tell his therapist about the market. Not yet. He wasn't ready to hope. He talked instead about control, about letting go of the urge to fix things with money, power, or gestures, that I'll never trust myself again. It had been weeks since Kyle saw her at the market. He hadn't reached out again. No follow-ups, no surprises. But even from a distance, he found ways to support her, ways that didn't cross her boundaries. He noticed she was running a small monthly newsletter for her customers. The formatting was uneven, the links sometimes broken. He hired someone, again anonymously, to design a clean template. Just one, just enough to make her work shine a little brighter. Alara received the updated layout with a polite email from a digital design volunteer. We love what you're doing. Just wanted to contribute. No charge, no strings. She stared at her laptop for several long minutes. Something was shifting, not around her, within. One afternoon, Kyle found himself standing in a long, winding checkout line at a neighborhood print shop. In his hand was a rolled-up sketch, one of Alara's designs he'd purchased, framed and then scanned for personal keeping. The man behind the counter squinted at the art. Winslow, huh? He said. You're the second guy today printing her stuff. Kyle turned slightly. Really? The clerk nodded. Yes, some guy ahead of you was ordering cards for a local nonprofit event. Said she donated a bunch of pieces last month. Kyle's chest swelled. Pride and ache blended into something new. Alara never stopped giving, even when she had every reason to turn inward. The next market came sooner than he expected. He hadn't planned to go again, but he did. Progress was quiet like that. Not a door flung open, but a crack of light. He continued showing up, not every week, not even every other, but consistently enough that she came to expect the quiet figure in the crowd, not at first. At home, Kyle opened the bag. Inside was a set of slightly off-centered botanical note cards. Tucked between them, a smaller envelope. He opened it carefully. In her handwriting, I don't know what you're trying to do, but I see it. But I'm not pretending I didn't love you. Maybe love doesn't disappear. Maybe it just waits. He read it twice, then sat down and wept again. Kyle didn't respond, not with words. But the next time he visited her booth, he brought 2 coffees. He didn't say they were for her. Then, quietly, she reached for the cup. Her fingers brushed his for a second. She didn't pull away. This continued, a slow unfolding. No questions, no we need to talk, just peace. Alara still hadn't let him in fully, and Kyle never asked for more than she was willing to give. But sometimes she laughed at something a customer said, and he saw a trace of who she once was, the woman who laughed in cars and painted flowers across his empty walls. One afternoon, she surprised him. You're different, she said, while rearranging prints. Kyle didn't ask her to explain. He just said, I'm trying to be. She nodded. That's all you can do. That night, Kyle journaled again. But for the first time, he didn't write about the past. He wrote about possibility. About becoming someone who didn't need control to feel safe. About being okay with unfinished conversations. About showing up without asking for applause. He folded that entry and tucked it into an envelope. He didn't mail it. He didn't need to. Some things were meant to stay quiet, not secrets but sacred. Alara's walls weren't gone, but unlocked, and for now that was enough. The first time Kyle saw his daughter up close, she was chasing a ladybug near the edge of Alara's booth. She couldn't have been more than 2.5. Wisps of curls tied up messily, her cheeks flushed from excitement. She squealed as the bug crawled up her finger, then let it go with a wide-eyed reverence. Kyle stood completely still. He hadn't prepared for this, not for the pang that hit his chest, not for the lump in his throat. He looked at Alara, who was already watching him. She said nothing, but she didn't call her daughter away. A small, silent permission. Big brown eyes stared up at him with curiosity. Kyle lowered himself slowly to her level. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak immediately. The little girl tilted her head. "Hi." His throat tightened. Kale followed her finger. "I saw." A pause. She beamed. Alara, standing a few feet away, crossed her arms, not in coldness but protection, watching, measuring, but she didn't step in. She let the moment breathe. The next week, Kyle returned with a small wooden puzzle shaped like garden vegetables. No branding, no packaging, just simple pieces he'd ordered from a local artisan. He left it quietly in a paper bag near her booth. Didn't say who it was for, didn't need to. That night, Alara opened the bag. Her daughter gasped with delight. They played for almost an hour, arranging and rearranging tiny wooden carrots and cabbages on the living room floor. Later, Alara sat alone on the couch, the empty bag in her hands. Her heart was quieter than it had been in months. Kyle never brought gifts for her, only for the child. And even then, they were never flashy or expensive. A coloring book filled with leaves and trees, showing love without pressure, being present without expectation. And Alara noticed. One evening, she surprised him. She was closing down her booth, her daughter bundled in a jacket, half asleep on her shoulder. Kyle had just helped another vendor carry a box of unsold candles to her van. As he passed by, Alara spoke. "She asks about you." He stopped mid-step. "She does?" Alara nodded. "Says you talk soft, like her bunny." A small laugh escaped her lips. It was the first time he'd heard it in years. Kyle smiled gently. "I can be quieter if you want." Alara looked at him. The streetlight above cast a pale circle around them. "No," she said. "I think she likes it." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. Alara was setting up early when Kyle arrived, 2 coffees in hand. This time she took hers with a quiet thanks. He stood beside her while she arranged her prints. They worked without needing to fill the air with words. At one point, she glanced over. "I read somewhere," she began, "that people don't change unless they really want to." He looked at her, waiting. "I never saw it until it was too late," he said. Alara looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. "It's not too late," she whispered, then turned away, busying herself with the basket of bookmarks. Didn't speak. The invitation came unexpectedly. "Would you like to walk with us?" Alara had just finished packing her booth. Her daughter clung to her leg, tired but fidgety. Kyle, who had been helping another vendor tie down a canopy, looked up mid-knot. "Of course," he said softly, brushing his hands on his jeans. They walked without a destination, just a few blocks past the row of vendors and into a quieter street lined with trees. The child skipped ahead, chasing shadows and waving to dogs behind fences. Kyle kept his pace beside Alara, careful not to brush too close. "How's therapy?" she asked after a while. He glanced at her, surprised. "Hard," he admitted. "Necessary." She nodded. "You talk about your mom?" "Every week," he said. "It's layered." "And us?" He hesitated. "Almost every session." That made her lips twitch. Not quite a smile, but not far from one either. "I'm not looking for a grand explanation," she said. "I just needed to know you see it. What happened? What it cost?" Kale didn't try to defend himself. "I see it every morning I wake up without you. And every night I wish I'd listened instead of reacted." They stopped walking. Her daughter had paused at a flower bed, bending down to examine something small. Alara crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. "There's a difference between guilt and growth, Kale." "I know," he said. "I'm trying to live in the second one." He showed up early to markets and helped set up without being asked. He brought coffee and left before she could say no. He greeted her daughter with the same quiet smile, always kneeling to her level, always listening more than he spoke. Sometimes Alara lingered after closing. Not long, just enough to ask a question or share a story. Like the time their daughter insisted a bee winked at her. One evening, as she loaded the last crate into her car, she turned to him. Kyle froze. She caught his hesitation. "To help fix the gate. It keeps dragging." He nodded slowly. "Of course," but they both knew that wasn't. the real reason. The gate repair took 20 minutes. He stayed 2 hours. He was invited in for tea, chamomile, no sugar, and they sat on opposite ends of the couch while her daughter stacked blocks on the rug. There was a moment, mid-conversation, when Alara reached to adjust a blanket on her daughter's shoulders. Her fingers brushed Kayal's hand. Neither pulled away. They didn't mention it, but something shifted. Later that night, as he was leaving, Alara followed him to the door. The hallway was dim, quiet. Her daughter had fallen asleep on the couch. Kel turned to thank her again, but Alara spoke first. "I've been angry for a long time. I don't blame you," she swallowed. "But I've also been tired of carrying it alone." Kyle stepped closer. "You don't have to anymore." Her eyes searched his face. For what? He didn't know. Truth, maybe, or the absence of performance. "You hurt me," she said, "but you're not hurting me now." He said nothing, just stood there. Then softly she added, "And that matters." He left without a kiss, without promises. Just a final glance over his shoulder as she closed the door gently behind him. And for the first time in years, Kale felt something other than grief in his chest. Not yet, but it was hope. Redemption isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's one quiet apology at a time. What's the hardest apology you've ever given or received? The garden was modest. No golden chairs, no glittering centerpieces, no fanfare. Just rows of wooden benches surrounded by wildflowers and light, fluttering linen tied to branches overhead. It smelled of rosemary and mint, of lavender and earth, and peace. Alara stood beneath a curved arch, barefoot on soft grass, wearing a linen dress the color of tea leaves. No veil, no train, just a simple silver pendant at her neck, a gift from her daughter, painted with tiny fingerprints. Kyle stood opposite her, his hands steady, eyes full. No audience of executives, no suits, just a man stripped of armor, humbled by the cost of losing and the gift of earning love back one breath at a time. The vows were private. They had written them separately, not to impress, but to speak clearly. "I see you now," Kyle had said, voice cracking halfway through. "Not just the woman who loved me when I didn't deserve it, but the woman who became more than love, who built a life when mine crumbled." Alara's reply had been quiet, but strong. "I'm not the same woman I was, but I am still the one who believed in you, and I believe in who you've become." Their daughter, now almost 3, sat cross-legged beside them, holding a small paintbrush and a ceramic bowl filled with soft pink pigment. She'd insisted on painting a wedding heart on the side of the bench. No one told her no. As Kyle and Alara exchanged rings, she stood and clapped wildly. No prompting, just pure, unfiltered joy. Alara laughed. Kyle wiped his eyes. The officiant smiled and stepped back, and with no cue but the quiet breeze between them, they kissed. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. Later, while guests gathered around a modest picnic spread beneath trees, Kyle sat beside his daughter on the edge of a wooden crate. "You still painting hearts?" he asked. She nodded, dabbing pink across her rock canvas. "Want to help?" she asked, holding up the brush. He took it, dipped gently into the pigment, and together they added petals to a flower she had started. Alara watched them from a few feet away, her heart full but still steady, not floating, not overwhelmed, just full. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a hard-earned beginning. When the sun dipped low and the laughter turned to whispers and soft songs, Alara found Kael near the garden fence, tying up string lights. "You good?" she asked. He looked at her, light glinting in his eyes. "Better than I've ever been." She stepped beside him. He reached for her hand, and she let him. There were still shadows, still memories they hadn't spoken of. But there was also this moment, and hundreds more ahead of them. Moments born not from perfection, but persistence. If this story reminded you that love is worth fighting for, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, never let someone else's fear write your story for you.